Good morning, everyone. How's your Wednesday going? We're back to talk about money. We're talking about how much money some of these outgoing Seahawks free agents might want, how much we as a team might be willing to offer them, and basically we're trying to determine if it makes sense to keep these players at the assumed price point. So, this one I wasn't sure if I should even do a dedicated video for, but to me, he's like right on that line, right? Where he might just be a min or min plus player, but he might be a little bit more than that. My plan for this section of how much to keep videos was to just talk about the mid-level guys, the guys who were probably going to get a little more than the minimum, or well, okay, I should say a decent amount more than the minimum, but not a lot more. And Will Dissly, to me, he might just be a veteran minimum guy or a vet min plus guy. But looking at his production, looking at what he's done so far in his career, looking at what other tight ends have gotten in recent seasons, plus the fact the cap has gone up, I think it's at least worth a discussion. So we're going to talk about Will Dissly in this video, and we're going to have to drill down pretty deep here. So Will Dissly, tight end. He's been here 4 years. He's 6'4", 265 pounds, about to turn 26, so he's entering his prime. But I wouldn't really call it his physical prime because at the end of the day, Will Dissly looked like he was going to be one thing, and then he had two devastating injuries, and since then he's been a completely different thing. In 2019, he was on pace to have one of the best seasons any tight end has ever had for the Seahawks. Then he got hurt in Game 6 against the Browns, missed the season. This on top of the season-ending injury he had had the previous year when he also started pretty hot. And now he's come back. Over the last 2 seasons, he has played in 32 combined games, counting playoffs, 32. So he's at least been healthy. But over those 32 games, he has a grand total of 46 catches for less than 500 yards and 3 touchdowns. And it seems like this is who he is now. Just a decent number 2 tight end, decent blocker, and good hands. He's good for he catches about a pass and a half a game, right? He averages about 1.5 passes caught a game. But I don't think he's ever going to get back to what he looked like he was going to be back in 2019. And by the way, PFF only graded him at a 64 for 2021, which might tell you that maybe he's not a great blocker. So, at the end of the day, Will Dissly is a player who has some value in the NFL, but it's pretty minimal at this point. He's a capable blocker, but I'm not seeing anything that indicates he's a great one. He's not some Jonnu Smith at this point. He's okay at catching the occasional pass, but he's never going to be a big-time playmaker. He's more of an occasional safety valve. Granted, Wilson sometimes doesn't utilize those tight ends for mass volume. Will Dissly would not be the first tight end to not catch a whole lot of passes from Wilson, but just looking at him physically, it feels like he did lose what little athleticism he had with those 2 injuries. So with all this in mind, what can we look at to try to compare Will Dissly to try to figure out what he might get paid? So we're going to go okay. Let's scroll to the top here and then scroll all the way back down. We're going to go through a bunch of these guys. I don't think I should have to explain why he's not going to get paid as much as the top tight ends. You guys are smart enough to figure it out. We're going past our boy Gerald Everett. We're going to go past, let's go past everybody making more than $3 million a year. There's no universe where Will Dissly makes more than $3 million a year. I think we can all agree on. So let's start at Dan Arnold of the Jacksonville Jaguars, originally of the Panthers. He signed a 2-year, $6 million deal, so $3 million a year with the Panthers after 2020. What did he do in 2020? Let's take a look here. He had 31 catches, 438 yards, 4 touchdowns. That's significantly better than any one season that Will Dissly has ever had. And like I said, he would have done better than this in 2019 if he didn't get hurt, but now he has gotten hurt, and now it seems like that's affected him. So I don't think that we're there yet in terms of production. And Dan Arnold's PFF grade is actually pretty comparable. So there are some through lines you can draw between Will Dissly and Dan Arnold. But I don't think we're there yet in terms of actual value. So let's look at Anthony Ferkster from the Titans. He signed a one-year, $3 million deal last year after 2020. And what did he do in 2020 to earn that money? He had almost 40 catches for almost 400 yards. Dissly hasn't had a season like that yet. I don't know if he's physically capable of having a season like that unless you feed him the ball in a way that makes him less efficient. Because one thing I'll say about Dissly right now is he is efficient. So that being said, so is Ferkster. And his PFF grade is actually really good, 77.1. So we got a little bit longer to go before we get to a good comp, I think. Let's see here. Next up, we're going to go down to an old buddy of ours, actually, past a couple of rookie contracts, and go to Nick Vannett, who signed a 3-year, $8 million deal with the Saints after 2020. And now we're kind of starting to get somewhere. So in 2020... he didn't really do that much for the Broncos. He had less than 100 yards. He averaged, he averaged less than a catch a game and had 1 touchdown. And the year before that, when he played for the Steelers and Seahawks, he had basically 1 catch a game for slightly more than 10 yards a game and no touchdowns. So this is a guy who I don't consider to be a great blocker or anything like that. To me, he's not that kind of tight end. The only thing you can say is, I guess in 2018, he had a season that was a little more prolific than anything Dissly's done. But we're getting close, right? This is not that far off. The only thing I would say is that Vannett probably had a little more assumed value because he hasn't had 2 devastating injuries the way Dissly had. So that probably affected things. His PFF grade for 2020 was a 57.2, which... hey, that's not barely replacement level. 2019, it was even lower than that. So we're in the right ballpark now, right? Vannett didn't really do that much, and he still earned a deal that gave him about $2.7 million a year. So we might already be getting there. Let's keep going, though. Let's take a look at Geoff Swaim, who signed a 1-year deal with the Titans after 2020. So if you go to Geoff Swaim in 2020, what did he do? He played in 10 games, caught 9 passes for 83 yards and a touchdown. So, yeah, not a whole lot at all. Borderline nothing. And the year before that, very, very little. He has 1 notable year in his career. 2018 Cowboys, he caught 26 passes for 242 yards in 9 games. So he bursts onto the scene and actually plays quite well in 2018. Would have been on pace for close to 50 catches if he had played every game. And since then, he had barely done anything, but he still got a decent contract. 1 year, $2.5 million. His PFF grade for 2020, by the way, was just 62, so basically replacement level. So we're there. We're basically there when it comes to Will Dissly. We'll go through a couple more names, but I think we've kind of reached the point now where we can point to guys and say their value should be basically the same as Dissly. That doesn't make me too thrilled, I'll say that, because at the end of the day, I don't really know what you're paying for other than just kind of a warm body with Dissly, but the comparison speaks for itself. Going through a couple more, let's go through some of these rookie contracts. Let's go to a Jesse James here, because Jesse James, he's a good deal further down than anyone else I was looking at. He signed a 1-year, $1.65 million deal with the Chicago Bears, so very close to the minimum. And what had he done in 2020 and before to earn that money? Not a ton, but I'll say this. Jesse James had 3 seasons at the end of his rookie contract in Pittsburgh that were more prolific and had bigger numbers than anything that Will Dissly had done. So that probably played into it a little bit, but the Bears were obviously looking at his 2 prior years with the Lions, where he had less than 300 combined yards, 30 combined catches, and 2 touchdowns, despite playing in every game. So that's probably what he got paid off of. Obviously, this Detroit stuff is not. It's a notch below what Dissly was doing these last couple years, but what he did in Pittsburgh was certainly more prolific than anything Dissly had done. And Jesse James's PFF grade for 2020 is, again, basically replacement level. So, Jesse James, it's in the ballpark, but it seems to me that if you're being objective, Will Dissly would have a little bit more value than Jesse James did at that point. Final guy I want to look at just for fun is James O'Shaughnessy. Hopefully I got that right. He signed basically 1 year, $1.6 million deal with the Jaguars after 2020. And in 2020, playing for, well, still the Jaguars, he had 28 catches for 262 yards. So I guess the interesting thing to note here, and the thing that makes me a little more positive, the thing that I like, is that for tight ends of this level, it can really go one way or the other pretty violently, right? Like, there's not a big difference between the production you're seeing from James O'Shaughnessy over these last few years before he signed that contract and what you saw from Nick Vannett. In fact, you might say that Dan O'Shaughnessy produced more than Nick Vannett, and yet he got a lot less money. So there is some stuff built around here that is circumstantial. You could reasonably look at O'Shaughnessy here and say, hey, that's your Will Dissly comp. That's what Will Dissly should be getting. His PFF grade was a little lower than Dissly's as well, by the way, but the comparison exists. So maybe maybe the market just won't be there to Dissly to where instead of getting $2.5 million, he can only get $1.7 million. For players of Will Dissly's caliber, you're kind of walking along the edge of a knife. Very easy to fall off. So, in terms of objective value, I think that you could say that Will Dissly is probably looking at something like 1 year, $2.5 million, maybe 2 years, $5 million, 3 years, $7.5 million, basically $2.5 million a year. Whatever it may be, $2.5 million, basically what Swaim got, a little less than what Vannett got, in the same universe as what Vannett got. Now, can I go there? No. I don't think, with all the things we need this offseason, I need to be giving $2.5 million a year to a tight end who is okay. He's got good hands, catches a pass and a half a game, okay blocker, but he isn't really good at anything other than having good hands. And those good hands only come into play like twice a game at most. So, if things go this offseason, and by the way, this tight end class in free agency is loaded, so just like Gerald Everett might fall through the cracks, Will Dissly might fall through the cracks. You might be able to get him for less. You could get him for what Jesse James got. You could get him for what O'Shaughnessy got. 1.6, 1.7 million. I'm going to say that if you can get Dissly for 1.8 million a year or less, that's about the point where I start to go, all right, 1.8 for 1 year, 3.6 for 2, 5.2 for 3, whatever. If you can get him for something like that, and you should have a good shot at that because, again, there's a range, right? There's not one set price for these players. It's a range. And I think that the range can easily end up producing a number around that 1.8 number. It could even be less. Honestly, if Will Dissly ends up being a veteran minimum player, it wouldn't shock me, just because of his injury history and the fact that he's never really done anything to really turn heads. But I'm going to say that in an objective normal market, he would be getting about 1 year, 2.5 million. I'm going to say that because the market is oversaturated with quality tight ends this offseason, probably down to 1 year, 2 million, or 2 years, 4. And if he's willing to come down a little bit to like 1.8 a year, then I say yes, bring him back in. But if it's more than that, I have to kind of walk away at that point. But that's my projection for Will Dissly. 1 year, $2 million. I'll go to 1.8, and if he's willing to take a little bit less, or if he doesn't get the offers that I'm expecting, he can come back. Let me know what you think down below. Go Hawks.